Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. The Child in the Toy.
I remember that day vividly. It was a sunny Saturday, and I was determined to make my son Ben's birthday special. He had been talking non-stop about how excited he was to turn 8, and all he wanted was a toy he could cherish. So, we headed to the Walmart down the street, a place we frequented often. As soon as we stepped through the automatic sliding doors, the familiar scent of popcorn from the snack aisle welcomed us. Ben dashed ahead, his excitement palpable, his laughter echoing through the aisles. I smiled as I watched him skip down the colorful toy section, his little hands reaching out to touch every brightly packaged box. "Mom, look at this one!" he shouted, holding up a shiny action figure. But I could see the sparkle in his eye drift to a small, dimly lit aisle at the back of the store. It seemed to call to him. "Let's keep looking, buddy," I suggested, trying to steer him toward the newest toys, but he insisted on exploring the back aisle. With a playful sigh, I followed him. As we wandered deeper into the aisle, I noticed a collection of old-fashioned toys stacked high on the shelves: dolls, wooden cars, and even a few dusty board games. One doll, in particular, caught Ben's attention. It was shabby, with frayed clothes and glassy eyes that seemed almost alive. "Can I have her, Mom? Please," Ben pleaded, his eyes wide with wonder. I hesitated, looking at the worn-out toy. Something about it felt off, but I didn't want to ruin his excitement. "Sure, if that's what you really want," I replied, trying to sound encouraging. As soon as he held the doll, I noticed a change in him. He started talking to it as if it were a real person. "What do you think, Lucy? Should we go play?" he asked, laughing. I chuckled, thinking it was just his wild imagination at work. But a nagging feeling settled in my stomach as I watched him. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at the doll, as if it were more than just a toy. Little did I know that our seemingly innocent trip to Walmart would turn into something far more terrifying. As we continued our shopping trip, I tried to shake off the unease that crept into my mind. Ben was too absorbed in his new doll, which he had named Lucy, to notice my growing concern. He carried it everywhere, cradling it as if it were his most prized possession. We made our way through the aisles, picking up snacks and birthday decorations. I watched him chat and giggle with Lucy, whispering secrets that I couldn't hear. At first, I thought it was just a cute phase, but then it started to feel different. He seemed almost entranced, as if the doll were drawing him into another world. "Ben, are you ready to check out?" I called, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned his back to me, facing the shelves with a look of intense concentration. "Ben," I raised my voice, feeling a twinge of frustration. He finally turned to me, his eyes wide and filled with a strange joy. "Did you hear that?" he asked, almost breathless. "Hear what?" I replied, a sense of dread pooling in my stomach. "The whispers. Lucy says we should go look for them," he exclaimed, his voice a mix of excitement and confusion. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What whispers?" I pressed, trying to remain calm. "The ones in the aisle. They're calling us," he insisted, his gaze drifting back to the shadows of the aisle where we had found the doll. My heart raced. I glanced around, half expecting to see other customers, but the store was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered above us, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow flit across the wall. "Let's keep moving, okay?" I said, trying to sound cheerful, but my voice felt strained. I led Ben towards the checkout area, but he tugged at my arm, still focused on the aisle. "I want to go back," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "Lucy wants to show me something." "Ben, we can come back another time. It's getting late, and we need to get home," I urged. But he was already moving away from me, drawn to that dim corner of the store like a moth to a flame. Against my better judgment, I followed him, the pit in my stomach growing deeper with each step. I knew I should have stopped him, but there was something about the way he looked at that aisle, an undeniable curiosity mixed with a hint of fear. As we approached, the whispers grew louder, like the rustling of leaves on a windless night. I could hear soft voices, low and unintelligible, weaving around us. My heart pounded in my chest, and I glanced around, expecting someone else to be there. But it was just us. Ben stood frozen, staring into the shadows. "Do you hear them, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a wave of panic wash over me, and I shook my head, desperate to keep my composure. "No, honey. Let's go back." But before I could pull him away, he took a step forward, and I felt the world tilt. The lights flickered again, and the whispers turned into soft laughter, an unsettling sound that echoed off the shelves. In that moment, I knew we were stepping into something much darker than I had ever imagined. I grabbed his hand, trying to pull him back, but I could see that Ben was already lost in whatever was calling to him. I felt the weight of dread pressing down on me as I pulled Ben closer. "We need to go now," I insisted, but he resisted, his gaze locked on the shadows in the aisle. The laughter faded, leaving behind an unsettling silence that seemed to throb in the air. "Lucy wants to show me her friends," Ben said, his voice calm but unnervingly distant. I glanced at the doll, its glassy eyes staring back at me, and a chill ran down my spine. "Ben, listen to me. There's nothing in there for you," I said, my heart racing. I didn't understand what was happening to him, but I felt an overwhelming urge to protect him from whatever dark force was at play. Just as I was about to physically drag him away, he yanked his arm free and bolted toward the back of the aisle. "Ben!" I shouted, panic flooding my voice. I hurried after him, my pulse quickening as I navigated the maze of shelves. When I reached the end of the aisle, I found him standing before a locked door, the shadows seeming to swallow him whole. The door was old, the paint chipped and faded, and the sign above it read, "Employee Only." "Ben, don't touch that," I yelled, but he was already pushing against the door, testing the handle. To my surprise, it creaked open, revealing a dark storage room beyond. "Lucy says we should go in," he replied, his voice eerily calm as he stepped over the threshold. My stomach dropped, and I felt a sickening twist of fear. "No, we're not going in there." I grabbed his arm, but he looked back at me, his expression almost pleading. "But Mom, I want to see." A part of me wanted to run, to flee this strange situation and never look back. But another part, the motherly instinct deep within, told me I had to protect him. "I'm serious, Ben. We need to leave this place now." As I pulled him away, I noticed the temperature in the room drop suddenly, a cold breeze rushing past me. The door slammed shut behind us with a loud bang, and I stumbled back, my heart racing. "What was that?" Ben asked, his eyes wide, filled with a mix of excitement and confusion. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But I don't like it. Let's just go check out and head home." I turned to leave, but a flicker of movement caught my eye. I glanced back at the door, my breath hitching in my throat. There, just beyond the glass, I saw shapes moving in the dark, shadows of children. They hovered just out of reach, their faces obscured, but I could feel their eyes boring into me. "Mom, are they Lucy's friends?" Ben whispered, his voice trembling slightly now. I swallowed hard, panic surging through me. "We're leaving." I pulled him with me, but as we rushed down the aisle, I felt the whispers return, wrapping around us like a shroud. They grew louder, merging into a cacophony of voices, and I could barely make out words. "Stay with us. Don't leave." I glanced back, but the aisle was empty, the shadows retreating as quickly as they had come. Ben looked up at me, his expression now a mix of fear and confusion. "Mom, what's happening?" I knelt down to his level, trying to steady my voice. "I don't know, sweetie, but I promise I'll keep you safe. Just stick close to me." But as we moved toward the front of the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever we had disturbed in the depths of that aisle was far from finished with us. As we hurried toward the front of the store, the whispers morphed into something more sinister, a low hum that felt like it was vibrating through the very floor beneath my feet. I could hear Ben's small footsteps echoing alongside mine, but the rhythm felt off, too slow, as if he was hesitating. "Mom, I want to go back and see Lucy," he said, his voice small and unsure. I stopped in my tracks, fear creeping up my spine. "No, Ben, we're not going back. I need you to trust me right now." But he tugged on my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "But I don't want to leave her. She's my friend." My heart sank. I could see how much this doll meant to him, but I knew something was deeply wrong. The air around us felt charged, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced back over my shoulder, half expecting to see those shadowy figures lurking behind us, but the aisle was empty. I led Ben toward the checkout area, but the familiar sights of the store felt alien now. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance along the shelves. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of normalcy, but the store felt more like a labyrinth than a place of comfort. As we reached the checkout lanes, a sudden chill enveloped us, making the hair on my arms stand on end. I turned to Ben, but he was staring past me, his face pale. "Mom, look," he whispered, his voice trembling. I followed his gaze and felt my blood run cold. At the far end of the checkout line stood a group of children, all staring at us with hollow eyes. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces pale and gaunt. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Ben, we need to go. Now," I urged, grabbing his hand tightly. I turned to run, but the shadows along the aisle began to twist and writhe as if alive. "Stay with us!" The whispers grew louder, now layered with laughter that echoed eerily in my ears. I felt a rush of cold air against my back, like a gust from an open window, and I knew we had to escape before it was too late. We bolted toward the exit, but as we approached the automatic doors, they remained stubbornly closed, despite our frantic attempts to push them open. "Why won't they open?" I shouted, panic rising in my throat. I pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. The air felt thick, heavy with an unshakable sense of dread. I could hear the whispers growing closer, swirling around us like a storm. "Mom, they're coming!" Ben screamed, and I turned just in time to see the group of children advancing toward us, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. I could see their mouths moving, but their words were drowned out by the cacophony of whispers. "Please, just let us in," I begged. my heart pounding. I felt a strange compulsion to reach out to them, to listen to their whispers, but I fought against it. This was wrong. This was not my son's playtime fantasy. "Ben, hold my hand tightly," I yelled, my voice breaking. We stood frozen, the shadows closing in on us. Desperation clawed at my insides, and I racked my brain for a way out. And then I remembered the staff entrance we had passed earlier, the one that had been unlocked. "Ben, follow me," I shouted, turning on my heel and dragging him with me. We sprinted past the eerie figures, their hollow laughter echoing in our ears, and I felt a surge of adrenaline propelling us forward. The staff entrance was just a few steps away, but I could hear the whispers gaining on us, now mingled with high-pitched giggles that sent shivers down my spine. "You can't leave. Stay with us." I threw open the door, pulling Ben inside as I slammed it shut behind us. We were in a narrow, dimly lit corridor lined with shelves of unstocked merchandise. My heart raced as I glanced back at the door, half expecting it to burst open. "What's happening, Mom?" Ben asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know, but we need to keep moving," I said, forcing myself to sound calm. The air was stale, and the darkness felt suffocating as we moved deeper into the store's bowels. I could still hear the echoes of laughter outside, a chilling reminder that we weren't safe yet. With every step, I could feel the shadows closing in around us, and I knew we had to find a way out before it was too late. As we navigated the narrow corridor, the air grew thicker, the darkness pressing in around us. Ben's small hand clutched mine tightly, his breathing shallow and frantic. I could hear the whispers now, hushed voices that seemed to seep through the walls, calling out to us, taunting us. "Mom, I want to go home," Ben cried, his voice cracking. "Me too, buddy. Just a little further," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even as my heart raced. I had no idea what awaited us beyond the next turn, but I knew we couldn't stop now. We rounded a corner, and my breath hitched. Before us stood a large break room, dimly lit and filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. The fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, casting ominous shadows on the walls. A long table sat in the center, surrounded by chairs that looked as if they hadn't been touched in years. But what caught my eye were the toys scattered across the floor: dolls, action figures, and stuffed animals, each one eerily familiar, as if they had once belonged to children who vanished without a trace. "Mom, look!" Ben pointed at a doll perched on one of the chairs. It was Lucy, the very doll he had wanted to buy. But there was something off about it now. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow us as we stepped closer, and I could feel a chill creep up my spine. "Ben, stay back," I warned, instinctively pulling him closer to me. I approached the doll cautiously, my heart pounding. As I reached out to touch it, the whispers crescendoed, a cacophony of voices swirling around us. "Join us, play with us," they beckoned, their tone chilling. Suddenly, the lights flickered more violently, plunging the room into darkness for a split second. When they returned, the children from before were standing around us, their faces expressionless, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Why did you leave us?" one of them asked, their voice a haunting echo that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to find my son," I stammered, my heart racing as I tried to shield Ben behind me. "Stay with us," they cried in unison, their voices rising in pitch, sounding almost desperate. I could feel their cold presence closing in, the air becoming suffocating. "Ben, we have to get out of here," I shouted, panic flooding my voice. I turned to run, but the children blocked our path, their hollow eyes watching us with a mix of sorrow and malice. "Don't you want to play?" one of them asked, stepping closer. "We'll never let you go." I felt a surge of defiance rise within me. "No, we're leaving," I shouted, my voice firm. I pushed past the specters, desperately searching for an exit. The whispers turned into shrieks, the children's laughter now twisted and filled with anger. "You can't escape. You belong to us." With every ounce of strength, I pulled Ben toward the far side of the break room, where a door stood slightly ajar. I flung it open and rushed through, finding ourselves in a dark storage area filled with stacked boxes and forgotten items. "Keep going," I urged Ben, my heart racing as I heard the children's cries fade into the distance. But I knew they wouldn't give up easily. We raced through the maze of shelves, the shadows stretching out around us as if trying to reach us. I could still hear the whispers echoing in my mind, but I pushed them aside. "We're almost there," I told Ben, my voice a mix of determination and fear. Finally, we spotted a flickering exit sign at the end of the aisle. I grabbed Ben's hand tightly and ran toward it, my heart pounding as I heard footsteps echoing behind us, growing louder. "Mom!" Ben screamed, glancing back, fear etched on his face. "Just a little more," I shouted, willing myself to reach the door. As we approached, the air felt electric, charged with desperation. We burst through the door, stumbling out into the parking lot, gasping for breath. I quickly turned to look back, half expecting to see the children chasing us, but the store loomed silent and still. The whispers faded into the night, replaced by the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. "Are we safe?" Ben asked, his eyes wide with fear. "For now, yes," I breathed, pulling him close. But deep down, I knew we had merely escaped one nightmare. The shadows of that Walmart would haunt us, and I could still feel their cold, watchful eyes lingering on us, waiting for the moment we might return. "Let's go home," I said, taking a deep breath as we walked toward my car, hoping the horrors of that night would remain just that, a memory. But I could never shake the feeling that the darkness would always be watching, just beyond the edge of the light.
Missing in aisle 7.
It was supposed to be a harmless adventure, just a group of friends looking for a thrill after hours. We had all heard the stories about the abandoned Walmart on the outskirts of town. Tales of its haunted past and strange happenings had been whispered around campfires and sleepovers, but we were determined to prove them wrong. As the clock struck midnight, we crept through the broken fence and into the parking lot, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and dread. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the store's darkened facade. Armed with flashlights and a few snacks, we made our way inside, the heavy door creaking ominously behind us. The vast, empty space felt both exhilarating and unsettling. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting long shadows that danced across the aisles. We split up into pairs, laughing as we began to explore. I partnered with Emily, while Jake and Mark ventured off towards the electronics section. "Let's play a game of hide and seek," Emily suggested, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I hesitated but eventually nodded, thinking it would add to the thrill. We counted to 20, our voices echoing through the store, then scattered in different directions, laughter ringing out as we ducked behind shelves. I found a perfect hiding spot behind a stack of boxes, my pulse quickening with a rush of excitement. But as the seconds ticked by, that thrill began to morph into something else, something darker. I heard the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance, and my heart sank. "Guys," "Where are you?" I called, my voice trembling slightly, but only silence answered. Taking a deep breath, I peeked around the corner, hoping to catch a glimpse of Emily or the others. The aisle felt endless, stretching out into shadows that seemed to swirl and shift. Something about the stillness of the store felt off, but I shook it off. It was just a game, right? But then, just as I was about to step out, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow moving toward aisle 7. I squinted into the darkness, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the longer I stared, the more I felt an unsettling chill crawl up my spine. I turned to call for Emily, but a low whisper caught in my throat. "Help me!" It was faint, almost imperceptible, yet I felt it resonate deep within me. I took a step back, uncertainty gnawing at my gut. I forced myself to shake it off, reminding myself it was all in good fun. I just needed to find Emily and the others. So, I took a deep breath, gripping my flashlight tighter, and started walking deeper into the store, unaware of the darkness that awaited me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement, something darting just beyond my flashlight's beam. My heart raced. I stepped cautiously into aisle 7, still trying to shake off the creeping unease that had settled over me. "Emily, Mark, Jake," I called out again, my voice echoing through the dimly lit space. But the silence that met my ears felt heavier this time, more oppressive. I continued down the aisle, the cold air wrapping around me like a shroud. As I turned the corner, I felt a sudden chill brush past me, sending goosebumps racing across my arms. It was almost as if something had moved, something just beyond my line of sight. I turned quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Guys, this isn't funny," I yelled, trying to mask my rising panic. Just then, I heard footsteps behind me. "There you are," I exclaimed, spinning around, but it wasn't Emily. It was Mark, his face pale and eyes wide. "Have you seen Jake?" he asked, his voice shaky. I frowned, realizing I hadn't seen or heard from Jake since we started the game. "No." "He was with you, right?" I replied, dread pooling in my stomach. "He must have gone too far." Mark looked around nervously, his breath hitching in his throat. "We should find him. This isn't funny anymore." I nodded in agreement, a sense of unease settling over us like a heavy fog. We retraced our steps back to the electronics section, calling Jake's name, but the store seemed to swallow our voices. "Jake," I shouted again, a note of desperation creeping in. The only response was the faint hum of the refrigerator section nearby. As we neared the electronics aisle, I felt the temperature drop. "Did it just get colder?" Mark asked, shivering slightly. I glanced around, a sense of foreboding washing over me. "Yeah, it did," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We walked further into the aisle, the shadows stretching unnaturally around us. "Jake," I called again, but there was no answer. Just when I thought we'd reached a breaking point, I heard a faint sound, a soft whisper. "Help me!" My blood ran cold. "Did you hear that?" I asked, turning to Mark, who looked equally alarmed. "I did," he said, his eyes darting nervously. "It sounded like it came from the back." Without thinking, I took a step toward the sound. "We have to find him," I insisted, adrenaline surging through me. Mark hesitated, glancing nervously at the darkened corners of the store. "I don't know, man. This feels wrong," he replied, but I was already moving, drawn in by that whisper, the promise of Jake's voice mingling with the shadows. As we walked deeper into the store, the whispers grew louder, twisting into a chorus of disembodied voices, overlapping and unintelligible. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, his face paler than before. I could see the fear etched into his features, but the thought of leaving Jake behind was unbearable. "See that?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. Mark nodded slowly, and we both stood frozen for a moment, uncertainty gripping us. "Maybe it's Jake," I said, desperate to believe. But as I took a step forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong, that whatever lurked in the darkness was more than just a game. The deeper we ventured into the store, the more the air thickened with an unsettling tension. The whispers became more pronounced, echoing off the walls like a haunting melody, wrapping around me in a chilling embrace. "Jake!" I shouted again, my voice trembling. Each syllable felt like a plea, but all that greeted me was the eerie silence. Mark and I pushed further into the darkness, our flashlights flickering as if struggling against the encroaching gloom. "We have to find him," I insisted, trying to keep my voice steady, but doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. What if we were too late? What if something had already taken him? Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the store, and we both jumped, instinctively huddling closer together. My heart raced as I turned toward the source of the sound. "That came from the back room," Mark exclaimed, his eyes wide with fear. "We should check it out," I suggested, though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Mark hesitated, glancing at the shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of our flashlights. "Are you sure? This feels wrong." "I can't just leave him," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me for a long moment, weighing his options, then nodded reluctantly. We crept toward the back room, each step echoing in the silence. The atmosphere grew heavier, as if the air itself was thick with dread. As we approached the door, I noticed it was slightly ajar, swinging gently as if inviting us in. "Jake!" I called again, my voice cracking. "Are you in there?" No response. Just that same unsettling whispering that now seemed to swirl around us like an invisible storm. With a shaky breath, I pushed the door open, and it creaked ominously as we stepped inside. The room was dark, littered with dusty boxes and broken shelves. "Jake!" I called once more, stepping further into the room. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing unsettling images of faded posters and merchandise long forgotten. A chill ran down my spine. I felt as though we were intruding on something that shouldn't be disturbed. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a flicker of movement. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, and caught a glimpse of a shadow darting behind a stack of boxes. "Mark, did you see that?" I whispered urgently, my voice trembling. Mark nodded, but he looked terrified. "We need to go. Now," he urged, but I felt a strange pull toward the darkness, an insatiable curiosity mingled with fear. "Wait, maybe it's Jake," I insisted, trying to keep the hope alive. I took a cautious step toward the boxes, my flashlight illuminating the corner just enough to see. Nothing but more shadows. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, clawing at the edges of my mind. "Help us!" They seemed to beckon, a chorus of lost souls trapped in the void. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, flooding the room with harsh, fluorescent brightness. I blinked against the sudden glare, my heart racing. But the momentary clarity shattered the illusion of safety. "Where's Jake?" Mark's voice trembled beside me. I turned to reply, but froze as I noticed something horrifying. Mark was staring at the shadows behind me, his face drained of color. "What is it?" I asked, my pulse quickening. I turned around slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. That's when I saw them. A line of figures standing just beyond the edge of my flashlight beam, their faces obscured, but their eyes fixated on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Run!" Mark screamed, breaking the spell. We bolted for the door, but as I sprinted, I felt something cold brush against my arm, a hand, skeletal and icy. I yelped, pulling away, but the figures were closing in, their whispers rising to a cacophony that drowned out my thoughts. We barreled into the main aisle, panting and terrified, but as we turned to look back, I realized the room was empty. No Jake, no figures, just the oppressive silence of the store. "Where did they go?" I gasped, panic rising in my chest. Mark was trembling beside me, his face pale. "We need to find Jake. We can't leave him." I nodded, fear twisting in my gut, but a nagging thought clung to me. What if whatever we had just encountered wasn't done with us yet? The silence in the main aisle felt suffocating, like a heavy blanket pressing down on me. My heart raced as I turned to Mark, desperation etched on my face. "We have to keep looking for Jake," I said, though every fiber of my being wanted to run for the exit. Mark's eyes darted around the store, as if he could sense the danger lurking in the shadows. "But what if those things come back?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we couldn't leave Jake behind. We started moving again, sticking close together, our flashlights cutting through the dim light. The whispers returned, creeping around us like a sinister fog. "This way," I urged, heading toward the grocery section, hoping that Jake might be hiding among the shelves. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Each rustle of the plastic bags and the distant hum of the refrigerators seemed amplified, echoing in the empty aisles. "What if he's hurt?" I asked, trying to keep my mind focused. "What if something got him?" Mark shuddered at the thought, and we both fell silent, the weight of our fears pressing down on us. We reached the back of the grocery section, where the shadows were deeper, the aisles tighter. "Jake," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. But all I heard in response was the soft sound of something moving, like footsteps, but they didn't belong to us. My stomach dropped. "Did you hear that?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. Mark nodded, eyes wide with terror. "It's coming from the frozen food section," he replied, his voice shaking. We exchanged a glance, the unspoken fear hanging between us. "Let's check it out," I suggested, my courage faltering but my resolve stronger than my fear. We approached the frozen food section, and the air grew colder with each step. The glass doors were fogged up, obscuring the contents inside. I reached for one of the doors, pushing it open with a creak that echoed through the aisle. Inside, the shelves were filled with frozen dinners and desserts, but there was no sign of Jake. Suddenly, I felt a rush of cold air behind me, and I turned just in time to see a shadow dart past us. "Mark!" I yelled, panic coursing through me. But before I could react, the lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness. "Get back!" Mark shouted, his voice barely cutting through the oppressive blackness. I could hear him fumbling for his flashlight, but the darkness was thick and suffocating, wrapping around us like a shroud. "Jake!" I screamed, desperation clawing at my throat. In the pitch black, I stumbled backward, feeling the shelves behind me, desperate to regain my footing. Just then, the lights snapped back on, and I gasped. Before us stood a figure cloaked in shadow, its features indistinct but unmistakably human. "Help me," it whispered, the voice eerily familiar. I squinted, heart racing. Jake. But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't him. The figure was distorted, its eyes hollow and empty, mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. My breath hitched in my throat. "What the hell are you?" I whispered, backing away instinctively. The figure reached out, fingers elongated and claw-like, a sound like fingernails on glass scraping against the frozen door. I felt bile rise in my throat. "It's not him, let's go," I shouted, pulling Mark with me as we dashed back into the main aisle. "We have to find an exit," Mark yelled, his panic mirrored in my own. As we ran, I could hear whispers swirling around us, calling my name, luring me deeper into the store. "Don't listen to them," Mark shouted, trying to cut through the chaos. But the voices were relentless, wrapping around my mind like a vice. "Help us! Help us!" they chanted, filling the air with despair. I shook my head violently, trying to block them out, but they only grew louder. Then, as we rounded a corner, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. A wall of merchandise blocking the exit. It wasn't just stacked shelves. It was like a fortress, sealing us inside. "No, this can't be happening," I cried, my voice breaking. Mark gripped my arm tightly, his eyes wide with terror. "We need to find another way," he shouted, and I nodded, my mind racing. But as we turned to find an alternate route, I felt a chill sweep through the aisle, and the shadows deepened, swallowing us whole. Panic surged through me as the shadows thickened, almost alive, swirling and twisting in the corners of my vision. I could barely think. My mind was racing, and all I could focus on was getting out of this nightmarish place. "Mark, we have to keep moving," I shouted, dragging him with me toward the electronics section, hoping there might be another exit or a way to call for help. As we ran, the whispers intensified, growing louder and more frantic, calling to us like sirens. "Help us! Help us!" They were everywhere, wrapping around us, making it hard to breathe. I shook my head, trying to block out the sounds. I couldn't let them take control of me. We burst into the electronics section, the dim light casting eerie shadows against the wall. Rows of televisions flickered with static, but there was no signal, just a haunting reflection of our frightened faces. "What if we can break a window?" Mark suggested, glancing nervously at the solid glass displays. "Maybe," I said, glancing toward the front of the store, but dread filled me when I realized the exit doors were still firmly shut, a barrier between us and freedom. "We have to find Jake first. He might be in here." "Are you kidding? We don't even know what's happening." Mark shot back, his voice laced with fear. But I couldn't abandon Jake. The thought of him out there alone, whatever those things were, made my heart race. We moved deeper into the section, but every shadow seemed to stretch and twist, reaching for us with cold, bony fingers. "This isn't right," Mark said, his voice trembling. "We should have never come here." Suddenly, the televisions flickered, and for a brief moment, the static resolved into a chaotic montage of faces, distorted, anguished expressions that seemed to scream silently at us. My heart dropped as I recognized one of them. It was Jake. "Jake!" I yelled, stepping closer to the screens, the reality of our situation crashing over me like a wave. "What happened to you?" His face twisted in agony, mouth moving but unable to form words. I felt my chest tighten with despair. "We have to help him," I insisted, but as I turned back to Mark, I realized he was staring wide-eyed at something behind me. I whipped around, and there they were, figures emerging from the darkness, their hollow eyes trained on us. My breath caught in my throat. "We need to go now," I screamed, adrenaline pumping through my veins as we turned and bolted down the aisle. But the whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls, merging into a cacophony of voices. "Stay with us! Stay with us!" They clawed at my sanity, pulling me back, tempting me to surrender to the darkness. "Don't listen to them," I shouted at Mark, my voice strained. "Keep running." We dashed toward the back of the store, where I could see a faint glimmer of light. Maybe the emergency exit? My heart raced with hope. As we neared the light, I felt something cold wrap around my ankle, causing me to trip and fall. "No!" I yelled, scrambling to get up, but as I looked back, I saw the shadows pooling around my legs, dragging me down. Mark grabbed my arm, pulling with all his strength. "Get up! Don't let them take you!" he shouted, his eyes wide with fear. I could see the desperation etched on his face, and somehow that gave me the strength to fight back. With a surge of determination, I kicked my legs, breaking free from their grip. "Let's go!" I gasped, and together we sprinted toward the light, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, we reached the door, and I yanked it open with a primal scream of relief. The bright light flooded in, and we stumbled out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. But just as we thought we were safe, I heard a voice behind us, a chilling whisper that froze me in place. "Help us!" it murmured, echoing through the night, haunting and sorrowful. I turned back, dread pooling in my stomach, but as the darkness loomed behind us, I felt something deep within me, the knowledge that we had escaped, at least for now. Mark and I stumbled away from the store, breathless and shaken, but I knew this wasn't over. Whatever had happened inside that Walmart, whatever dark presence had taken hold, it wouldn't be easily forgotten. As we made our way to the parking lot, I glanced back one last time. The store stood silent, the fluorescent lights flickering ominously. I shuddered, the echoes of those lost souls still ringing in my ears. But in that moment, I vowed we would uncover the truth behind those haunted aisles, no matter the cost. And as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning.
The last customer.
I still remember that night vividly, the night that shattered my sense of security in a place I thought I knew so well. It was just another late shift at the Walmart in Springfield, Illinois, a job I had held for over a year. I clocked in as usual, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting a sterile glow on the aisles I had grown so familiar with. As the clock neared 10 p.m., the familiar sounds of the store began to fade. I grabbed my radio and started my closing duties, making my way to the aisles to organize the shelves. The air felt thick and heavy, an almost palpable silence enveloping me. A chill ran down my spine, but I dismissed it as mere fatigue. After all, working late shifts had its downsides, and I often felt a bit jumpy when alone. As I stacked the last few items on the shelf, I noticed something strange. It seemed like the store was still bustling, despite the clock ticking closer to closing time. Glancing around, I realized that the number of customers had inexplicably increased. I thought we'd be nearly empty by now, but there they were, people milling about with blank expressions, their faces obscured by the dim light. "Can I help you with something?" I called out to a woman standing aimlessly in front of the cereal aisle. She turned slowly, her gaze drifting past me as if I were nothing more than a ghost. Her eyes were vacant, devoid of life or recognition. I shivered, a sense of unease settling in my stomach. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe she was just tired. It was late, after all. But as I moved deeper into the store, it struck me how eerie the atmosphere had become. I glanced at the clock again. Only a few minutes had passed since I first noticed the oddities. Shaking my head, I continued working, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I rounded a corner to head toward the next aisle, I felt a pair of eyes on me. I turned quickly, but it was just a man standing at the end of the aisle, staring blankly at a shelf of toothpaste. "Hey, you good?" I asked, forcing a smile. But he didn't respond. He just stood there, as if frozen in time. My heart began to race. I stepped back, my instincts screaming that something was wrong. Why were all these customers still here? I tried to convince myself that maybe it was a busy night, but the longer I stood there, the more I felt like I was the only one alive in this store. With a knot tightening in my stomach, I hurried down the aisle, trying to shake off the feeling of dread creeping up my spine. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come. As I continued to organize the shelves, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off. I glanced around the store, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. The customers, if you could call them that, seemed to multiply by the minute, their figures blurring into the dim light. They lingered in aisles, some staring blankly at products, others whispering softly to one another, their words lost in the hum of the overhead lights. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. Just finish restocking, I told myself. It'll all be over soon. But every time I turned a corner, I was met with more blank faces, more vacant eyes. It felt like I was walking through a living nightmare. I heard the faint sound of a cart squeaking nearby, and I turned to see a woman pushing a cart filled with random items, some snacks, cleaning supplies, and a few toiletries. But when she looked up, her gaze pierced through me, empty and distant. I could feel the weight of her stare, and for a moment I froze. "Do you need help with anything?" I managed to ask, but she just blinked slowly, as if processing my words, then turned her attention back to the cart, ignoring me completely. My skin crawled. The longer I spent in that store, the more I felt like I was trapped in a twisted version of reality. I began to notice more details, how the aisles seemed to stretch endlessly, how the lighting flickered every now and then, casting unsettling shadows that danced along the floor. I quickened my pace, trying to escape the oppressive atmosphere, but every aisle I turned down only led to more of those lifeless customers. A knot formed in my stomach as I glanced at the clock again. 10:15 p.m. Time was crawling, each second stretching like a rubber band about to snap. The sense of dread deepened. I had been in the store for over an hour, yet it felt like a lifetime. I took a deep breath and moved toward the front of the store, hoping to find some comfort in the checkout area. Maybe if I could see the registers and the exit, I would feel safer. But as I approached, the scene in front of me was anything but reassuring. The checkout area was crowded. More customers. No, they weren't just customers. They were watching me. Their heads turned in unison as I stepped closer, their expressions unchanged. I felt the blood drain from my face as a chill swept over me. My instincts screamed that I was in danger. I looked around for the manager or anyone who might help, but the store felt eerily deserted. Where is everyone? The thought raced through my mind as panic surged within me. I stepped back, trying to maintain my composure, but I could feel the weight of their gazes, pressing down like a suffocating blanket. I turned on my heels, desperate to escape the throng of blank stares, but every direction I looked seemed to lead me further into this nightmarish maze. I needed to get out. I needed to find a way to escape these shadows that had taken over the store. As I turned to make my way back down the aisle, my heart raced, pounding in my chest like a drum. I felt the panic bubbling up inside me, an instinctual fight-or-flight response that I couldn't shake off. Each step felt heavier, as if the very air around me was thickening, suffocating me. I glanced back at the crowd of customers, their faces still blank and expressionless, and I couldn't help but feel that they were closing in. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired and overworked. But deep down, I knew that something was horribly wrong. I could feel their eyes on me, unblinking and unwavering. It was as if they were waiting for something, and that something was me. I picked up my pace, almost jogging down the aisle. As I rounded a corner, I was met with a darkened section of the store, once brightly lit, now only illuminated by flickering lights. The shelves seemed to loom over me, casting elongated shadows that danced along the floor. I hesitated for a moment, a wave of uncertainty washing over me. Should I go back or keep moving forward? As I took a step into the darkness, I heard a soft whisper, barely audible but chilling nonetheless. I froze, straining to listen. It sounded like a name I couldn't quite make out. I felt my skin prickling as I scanned the shadows, searching for the source. But there was nothing, just the eerie silence that swallowed everything else. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice shaky. No answer came, only the echo of my own words bouncing off the walls. I turned on my heel, suddenly feeling the overwhelming urge to flee. I raced back toward the main aisle, only to find it crowded once again with those haunting figures. I pushed my way through, trying to remain calm despite the suffocating feeling of dread clawing at my throat. It felt as if the aisles were closing in on me, the customers closing ranks, their vacant expressions growing more unsettling. I spotted a tall man at the end of the aisle, standing completely still. His face was obscured by the shadows, but I could see the faint outline of a smirk stretching across his lips. A wave of nausea hit me as I realized he wasn't moving, just watching me, studying me like prey. I felt trapped, cornered like a rat. "Please, someone help!" I shouted, desperation flooding my voice. But my cries were met with silence. No one reacted. It was as if I were speaking into a void. I turned to flee, sprinting down the aisle and darting into the next one, hoping to find an exit or someone to help. But the store seemed endless, the aisles twisting and turning in a disorienting maze. I felt the temperature drop, a chill creeping into my bones as I raced past shelves filled with items I barely registered. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a haunting melody, echoing in my mind. I felt dizzy, disoriented, and utterly alone. Then, as I turned a corner, I collided with another customer, a frail elderly man who seemed to appear out of nowhere. I stumbled back, breathing heavily, my heart racing. He looked at me, his eyes wide, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition. "Help me, please," I begged, but before I could say anything more, he simply shook his head, his expression shifting from concern to something dark and unreadable. "Leave while you still can," he whispered hoarsely before disappearing into the shadows, leaving me standing there, alone and terrified. I felt the weight of the other customers closing in again, their blank stares boring into me. They weren't just shoppers. They were something more. My mind raced with the realization that I was in a nightmare, trapped in a place where the boundaries of reality were breaking down. I needed to escape. I needed to find a way out before it was too late. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I turned, desperately seeking a way out. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was trapped. The store had transformed from a mundane retail space into a twisted labyrinth, and the customers, no, the watchers, were closing in on me. My breath came in shallow gasps as I darted through the aisles, panic fueling my every move. I tried to stay focused, but the walls felt like they were closing in. Each turn I took seemed to lead me deeper into the heart of the store, away from the exit. I spotted a security desk near the front, a flicker of hope igniting in my chest. If I could just reach the desk, I could call for help. As I sprinted toward it, the whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind like a haunting chant. "Leave while you still can." The old man's warning replayed over and over, a sinister reminder of my growing sense of dread. I forced myself to push through, determined to reach the safety of the security desk. But when I got there, my heart sank. The desk was abandoned, the chair empty. The monitor screens displayed grainy footage of the store, the images distorted and flickering. I glanced back at the aisles, my anxiety spiking. I was completely alone. No one to help me, no one to guide me out. My fingers trembled as I grabbed the radio, hoping against hope that someone would respond. "This is Sarah at the Walmart on Main Street. I need help. I think something is wrong." The customers. My voice wavered as I struggled to articulate the chaos around me. Silence greeted my plea, the radio crackling faintly before falling silent again. I felt my stomach drop. I was alone in this living nightmare. Just then, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps approaching from behind me. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. There, standing at the end of the aisle, was the tall man I had seen earlier, the one with the unsettling smirk. He was flanked by a group of other customers, their faces still blank and lifeless, but now they were moving toward me, their eyes trained on my every move. I backed away, my heart racing, but there was nowhere to go. The aisles seemed to stretch infinitely, blocking any path to escape. The man stepped forward, a predatory glint in his eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice smooth yet chilling. "You don't belong in this place." My breath quickened as I glanced around for an exit. I spotted an emergency exit sign glowing faintly in the distance. It was my only chance. I turned and bolted, my feet pounding against the linoleum floor. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, drowning out the sound of my own heartbeat. I could hear the others following me, their footsteps echoing behind me as I ran. The cold air prickled at my skin, urging me to move faster. I reached the emergency exit door, my hands trembling as I pulled on the handle. Locked. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, desperate to escape. I could feel their presence closing in, the watchers surrounding me, their faces now twisted into expressions of hunger. "Please, let me out," I shouted, my voice hoarse with desperation. But the door remained stubbornly shut, and I could hear the soft laughter from behind me, a sound that sent chills down my spine. With nowhere left to run, I turned to face the gathering crowd, my heart pounding in my chest. They advanced slowly, an unsettling wave of humanity with no regard for my fear. Their eyes, once dull and vacant, now held a glimmer of something sinister. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just trapped in a store. I was caught in a nightmare of my own making. I had wandered into a world where the boundaries of reality blurred, where the mundane had become malevolent. I had to find a way to break free from this terrifying illusion, but with every passing second, it felt like hope was slipping further away. The oppressive weight of their gaze bore down on me, a chilling reminder of my isolation in this twisted reality. As I stood there, my heart pounding and my palms slick with sweat, I realized that the only thing separating me from this eerie mob was my sheer will to escape. I was terrified, but I refused to let that fear consume me. "Get away from me!" I screamed, my voice cracking with desperation. But they didn't flinch. Instead, they continued their slow, deliberate advance, an unsettling, synchronized movement that sent shivers racing down my spine. The laughter grew louder, echoing through the empty aisles, wrapping around me like a noose. I felt my back press against the cold metal door, and panic surged through me. I couldn't allow myself to be overwhelmed. Not now. I remembered the flashlight I had clipped to my belt earlier in the evening. With trembling hands, I fumbled to retrieve it, its beam cutting through the darkness as I flicked it on. "Stay back!" I shouted again, pointing the light at the nearest figures. The sudden brightness caused them to halt, their faces twisting into grotesque expressions of annoyance and confusion. For a moment, it felt as if I had found a small measure of power, a fleeting sense of control amid the chaos. But the moment passed quickly. The tall man, still standing at the forefront of the group, stepped forward. "You can't run from us, Sarah. You're one of us now," he said, his voice smooth and hypnotic, sending a chill through me that settled deep in my bones. "No," I shouted, forcing myself to sound defiant. I couldn't let them take me. I couldn't allow myself to be trapped in this nightmare forever. Desperately, I searched for anything I could use as a weapon, anything to create a distraction. In a split second, I spotted a nearby display of cleaning supplies. I lunged for a spray bottle, the harsh chemicals inside threatening to burn my eyes, but I didn't care. It was my only option. I raised the bottle and aimed it at the approaching figures. "Back off!" I yelled, squeezing the trigger as a fine mist sprayed toward them. The crowd recoiled slightly, their movements hesitating for just a moment. Seizing the opportunity, I pushed against the door, praying for it to yield. To my surprise, it creaked open, revealing the dimly lit corridor outside. Hope ignited within me, and I didn't hesitate. I dashed through the door and into the unknown. The corridor was eerily quiet, devoid of the chaos that had filled the store moments before. My heart raced as I sprinted forward, glancing back over my shoulder. I could still see the tall man standing at the threshold, a sinister grin etched on his face, watching me with amusement. I turned a corner, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and found myself in a narrow hallway lined with storage rooms. I could hear the whispers again, clearer now, echoing in the confined space. "You can't escape," they taunted, a chorus of chilling voices that filled my mind with dread. Ignoring the terror clawing at my insides, I pressed on, determined to find a way out. I tried each door as I passed, but they were all locked tight. Despair threatened to swallow me whole when, finally, I came upon a door that creaked open at my touch. I slipped inside and shut the door behind me, pressing my back against it as I took a moment to catch my breath. The room was dark, and I quickly fumbled for the flashlight again. It illuminated a small, cluttered office filled with forgotten paperwork and dusty boxes. But more importantly, there was a window. I rushed over, my heart racing with renewed hope as I tugged on the frame. It was locked. "No, no, no," I muttered, panic rising once again. I needed to get out. I couldn't let them find me. I grabbed a nearby chair, hefting it with all my strength. With one swift motion, I smashed it against the window, shattering the glass into 1,000 glimmering shards. The noise echoed loudly in the small space, sending a rush of adrenaline through me. I crawled through the broken frame, feeling the jagged edges graze my skin as I tumbled out into the night. As I hit the ground, the cold air enveloped me, and I took a moment to gather my bearings. I was outside, free from the claustrophobic nightmare of the store. But when I looked back, I felt my heart drop. The tall man stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the flickering fluorescent lights, flanked by the watchers. They were all staring at me, expressions cold and unyielding. I knew they wouldn't let me go that easily. I didn't waste a second. I stumbled to my feet and sprinted away, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I dashed into the night, desperate for safety. The echoes of their laughter faded behind me, but I could still feel their eyes watching from the shadows. I didn't know where I was running, only that I needed to put as much distance between myself and that store as possible. My mind raced with thoughts of what had happened inside, the unsettling reality that I had escaped, but at what cost? The terror was far from over. I could still sense it lurking just beyond the edge of my consciousness.